Hello, and welcome to our first instruction on how to use the import option in Freezerworks 2015. I'm Rick Michaels, and this is an example of how you can use Freezerworks to import data from your Excel spreadsheet or a text file into Freezerworks. Now, the import option is very flexible, and it has to be because there are so many different ways that you'll want to import samples and aliquots and patient data. So we need a tool that's as flexible as the many ways in which you need to do your work. Sometimes you need to import new samples, new aliquots. Sometimes you need to update existing samples and add aliquots. Sometimes you need to update samples and aliquots and patient data of existing records. In this first example, what we're going to do is give you an example of a data file in Excel. And these are samples with just a few data fields and the number of aliquots for each sample. So, for example, in this example that you see right here, we have 10 sample records with some data for each record and then a number for the number of aliquots that each of these sample records have. Now, I do not have box location in this example. That will be the next example if you want to see how to import box locations and such. In this situation, what I want to do is I'm going to import each of these sample records, and I'm going to create aliquots based on the number of aliquots for each of these records. So 30,000, sample ID 30,000, only has one aliquot, whereas 30,009 has 10 aliquots. So we're going to create new samples and attach aliquot records to each of those samples. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, it's important to remember that in Freezerworks, we import CSV and TXT files and such. We do not import Excel files. So the step you'll have to do if you have an Excel file is save it as one of those two options. Come over here, you hit the save, and you select save as type, and here's an option. We can do a tab delimited or CSV comma delimited file. Let's go ahead and select tab delimited. Gives us a TXT extension. We will save this file as a TXT. You'll get these messages here, warning messages. Go ahead and hit yes, it's okay. And now we'll go ahead and import that TXT file. Here at Sample Management, we select Import Data, and we're going to create a new format to match the format of our data file, our Excel file. Select Add New. Let's give it a name. I'll call this Import A. Now, we'll have to set up our parameters. First, is there a header record included in this import file? And to go back here, here's our header record. Freezerworks wants to know whether it should ignore the first record or try to import it. Since it's a header file, we want to ignore it. So let's go ahead and select here that there is indeed a header file. The field delimiter, remember that we selected the tab delimiter, TXT, and the record delimiter. As you recall, every sample record is separated by a new line in the data file. Our date format is the same here. No need to change anything here. And we don't have a time format, no time fields being imported. The next thing we want to do is select that text file that we're going to import, and we do that by selecting Open File here. Select Open File, and then we go and look and find the file that we created, and here it is. Here's our original Excel file. Here is the one that we saved in TXT. So this is the one we want to select. We select it and press Open. What Freezerworks will do then at this point is look at your header file record And your header record will have look at the names for each of these fields that we imported. It'll then also look at Freezerworks, and if it finds the exact match, it will suggest that you may want to use that record in Freezerworks to map to it. So, for example, it's the first record in my file was sample ID, and it went and Freezerworks saw that there is indeed a field in Freezerworks with the exact same name, so it's going to suggest that I go ahead and use that field to import into. Now, in some cases, I may not want to do that, and in fact, in this case, I don't want to do that. I created a special sample ID field in Freezerworks that I wanted to import this into. So let me show you how I select that. And what I do is I want to highlight this, and then I want to go to the table where I'm importing it into, and that would be the samples table. And I have a user-defined field down here that I called sample ID import. Here's the one that it found the match, but I want to actually import sample ID from Excel and into sample ID import. So I highlight that, I highlight this, and I select map, and now it's going to map the sample ID into the sample ID import. The next field was sample date. It found an exact match again, sample date. Here it is here. That's good. That's where I want to import it, so I leave that. That's fine. Now the third field was type, and it did not find a type field in Freezerworks, but what I want to do is I want to import that type, which in this case was BUF for Buffy coat. I'm going to import that into a field in the aliquots. Every aliquot record that I create is going to have a aliquot type of BUF Buffy. So I highlight this, highlight aliquot type, hit map, and my type field will be imported into aliquot type, which is in my aliquots table. Patient ID, it found another field with the exact same name. That's good. I'll leave it. Hospital, the same thing, and that's fine. I'm going to import those into those fields. And then the last field was a number of aliquots. It did not find a match, but in this situation what I want to do is go to my samples table, and I do have a number of aliquots total field, and so I want to map it to the number of aliquots total. So I select the map here. Okay, now the next thing I need to do is create some import settings to tell Freezerworks how, more specifically, I want to import these fields. First, the import type. Now I am adding samples, so I select import type add. And over here it gives me the details of what I want to do. Okay, now anytime that I am adding samples into Freezerworks, or anytime I do import, Freezerworks will want to know what field it should be the key identifier. And when it looked at the import file and it looked at the fields I selected import into, it only found one unique identifier, sample ID import, which is fine. This is indeed the key identifier that I'm going to create my samples with. Now over here, it wants to know what to do with new drop-down items. I'm going to add them to the list. BUF Buffy code is not in Freezerworks, but it's going to import, and it's going to add that as an option. But down here is where I'm going to have to select here, automatically create aliquots for how will aliquots be created. And what this will do then is it will create for each sample an aliquot according to the value of the number of aliquots column. Remember that I had a number in my field, my original field for number of aliquots. So when I selected this option here, it will automatically create one aliquot for the first record, two aliquots for the second record, three for the third, and so forth. Automatically create aliquot records as I import the sample records based on that number. Okay, now everything looks good at this point. So now I'm going to go ahead and do my import. I select import, and then I select import samples and create aliquots, the file that I want to import, and I select open. Writes the import data, and then here is my original report. The import is complete. I got no errors, and I have 10 samples created with 55 aliquots created from those 10 samples. Let's go ahead and look at those. Let's go ahead and select, I'm going to view these records that I imported by sample records using my list view. Let's go ahead and hit OK here, and now I will see here a list view of the 10 records that I created, and here they are. Let's go ahead and take a look at each one. And I want to change my form to a different form that I created for this purpose, and that would be this one here. And as you can see, here's my first record, sample ID 30,000. Let's call up my data file, and I have one aliquot, and here it is down here, my one aliquot, Buffy coat, and it assigned a Freezerworks ID here and a unique aliquot ID here as well as importing my sample ID. Go to the next record then, and that would be 30,001, and I imported 2 aliquot records. And again, now if I go to the third record imported, I have 3 aliquot records, and so forth. So these 10 records have been imported, and you can see here that each one has the aliquot. So let's take a look at the last one, which should have 10 aliquots, and here they are. So this is a situation where we imported samples, we created aliquots. The next example I will give you is how to then import box locations, if those are some box locations or something you have in your data in your Excel file as well. Thank you.